Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Launchpad. I'm your host, Dave Kluge, and today I am joined with Josh Larky of 33rd Team and Jared Smola of Draft Sharks. It is officially best ball season, and that is all we are going to be talking about today. In the first half of the show, we're going to be talking a little bit about strategy and some different styles that you might be able to implement into your best ball drafts. And in the second half of the show, we are going to be hammering player takes and talking about our favorite guys in every single round. We're going to be talking about some high upside guys that you might want to be drafting later on to help give you a big edge in tournaments. And we're going to be talking about some guys that are going to give you steady production every single week that you should be drafting and putting into your lineup. This is a great show with a ton of fantastic information coming your way. So be sure to stick through to the very end of this week's episode of The Launchpad. I'm your host, Dave Kluge, and today we are going to be diving into best ball. I'm joined with two fantastic guests here, Josh Larky and Jared Smola, and that's all we're going to be talking about. It's best ball season. You know, last week we were focused on dynasty a little bit, talking with Nate Liss and Jesse Reeves, and hopefully we gave you some good information so you can go out there and win some dynasty trades. But it is officially best ball summer, and that is all we are talking about today. I've got two fantastic guests here, so let me go ahead and introduce them. On the right side of your screen, I am joined with Josh Larky, who is now over at 33rd Team. They are building out some fantastic fantasy content over there, so be sure to check it out. Josh, let everyone know where they can find you on social media and what you guys are doing over at 33rd Team.
Well, Dave, first, thanks for having me. I know the people out there are probably sick of us. We've collabed a few times at this point. We kind of joined the industry at the same time. You can find me on Twitter at JLarkyTweets, and you will soon be able to see all of my content and the entire team's content on the33rdteam.com. We'll be launching at the start of August. So right now we're pretty much in stealth mode. We're going to have a fully redesigned site where we're blending football, fantasy, DFS, and betting. And we'll have more and more announcements over the next 2-3 weeks in terms of who will actually be contributing that content. So right now, mostly stealth mode, behind the scenes work, but it'll be good to break back out into the content world in just a few weeks.
So I don't want to pry too much because I know you got a lot going on behind the scenes, but I saw you recently brought on Jordan Vanek. Is there anybody else that has joined the team so far? Because that's a fantastic hire on the DFS side of things.
Oh, I thank you. In terms of new hires, what's fun is we're recording this now. It's going to be, you said it's going to get released tomorrow?
Yep, tomorrow, 12 p.m.
Literally
Eastern.
In an hour, there's going to be an announcement as to another full-time hire. So
exciting stuff.
For everyone out there, you'll be able to check my Twitter feed if you want, and you'll see who that new hire is. So
it's not me. It's not me.
No, that's not Jared. This isn't actually.
I didn't even get an interview. I'm appalled.
It's Dave, everyone. So that'll be the second. That'll be like the second big announcement for hiring. So very exciting to be able to have at least 2 people on the team now. So
awesome.
Can't say too much more.
I'm thrilled to see what you guys are building over there, and I will be checking your feed as soon as we get off this recording.
There we go.
In the middle of my screen, I am joined with Jared Smola. Jared, I believe you have been on some Football Guys shows before. I know Matt Schaaf is very much so a friend of the Football Guys Network, doing the IDP show with Sigmund Bloom pretty often. You can find Jared and all of his content over at Draft Sharks. But Jared, let everyone know where they can find you on social media and what you've got going on this time of year.
Yeah, I'm at Smola DS on Twitter, and all my content, all my rankings, all my projections are up at draftsharks.com. We're pumping out articles, keeping those rankings updated, keeping the projections updated 24/7. About to get busy here, so excited to get into camps and preseason, some real football to actually talk about. I feel like we've been talking about the same stuff for the past 3-4 months now, so that'll be fun.
It just dawned on me today, and today, again, being Thursday night, this is going to come out Friday morning, but 3 weeks from right now, 3 weeks from this moment, we're going to be watching preseason football. And yeah, it's preseason, it's not real football, but it's still something. I mean, we are there. We are in, can I call this the witching hour? Can I pull a Scott Hansen and say we're in the witching hour, like the final hours? It's almost time for football. I am ready for it. So we still got a few weeks left to get in those final best ball rosters, but let's go ahead and talk about that a little bit today. And the first thing I want to talk about, it's almost kind of become a joke at this point, how many different strategies there are with catchy, fun names. We got zero RB, zero wide receiver, hero RB, anchor RB, bully tight end, and so many more that I know I'm not even hitting on right now. So Josh, go ahead and start us off here. Obviously, you want to play the board a little bit. You don't want to lock yourself into any one strategy, but what is the draft strategy that you see yourself implementing the most often in your best ball drafts?
I'd say the one I do the most is what many people will call hero RB. I take a running back in the first 1, 2, 3 rounds, and I take a lot of wide receivers. I've just kind of felt like wide receiver, everyone's always like, oh, wide receiver is very deep this year. It's deep every year. I actually, when doing projections, when just looking at draft boards, I'm pretty uncomfortable if I don't have 3, 4, 5 receivers by pretty early receivers. So like if I'm through like 8 rounds of my draft and I don't have 4 or 5 receivers, I get pretty uncomfortable with how my final roster looks. So that's kind of led to a lot of the hero RB where I really like some of these round 2 and round 3 running backs. So it's often been like receiver in the first round or running back in the second or third, and a lot more receivers after that. I'd say the other one is just zero RB, where naturally, if for some reason some of the running backs I've been looking at are off the board, then I'll just say, oh, you know what? I am totally comfortable taking 4 or 5 receivers in the first 5, 6 rounds, maybe an elite quarterback or tight end. So those are kind of the two I've done the most often. Probably be like hero RB, zero RB, and then everything else I think would be significantly lower than that.
Yeah, and we do hear it every single year about how deep wide receivers are, and we've been hearing that a lot this offseason. I don't want to get too much into player takes. We'll save that for the end of the show. But yeah, I feel like it's like around like that wide receiver 25, wide receiver 26 area. That's when it really thins out, because there you're looking at Brandon Cooks, Rashad Bateman, and then after that, pretty much everyone is speculative. You got Juju Smith-Schuster, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Chris Godwin, Amari Cooper, guys that you want to draft on your team because of the potential upside, but there's also a ton of risk there. You know, you're not drafting sure things. So really what you're looking at is, you know, about 24, 25 receivers that you can confidently draft and you want on your team. And I'm with you, Josh. I want to get like 4 or 5 of those guys on my team as much as possible. And, you know, still being stuck in best ball brain here. I just did my SFB draft the other day. That's exactly how I drafted it, was anchor RB. You know, I drafted Austin Eckler as the first running back off the board, smashed a ton of mid-round wide receivers, and didn't even take an RB2 until Rashad Penny. And it's just doing all these underdog drafts. That's kind of what I am programmed to be doing right now. But Jared, same question over to you. Do you have a preferred draft strategy, or do you try to mix it up as much as possible?
Yeah, I'm always willing to mix it up depending on what gets to me and where you're picking, you know, in the draft. But I guess I'm a little more RB heavy than you guys. Like, so there's, if I look at the rankings this year, there's like 12 to 15 like elite running backs that I just want to try to get my hands on in best ball. So if that means spending my first 2 picks, even my first, I've taken RB in a few underdog drafts when the board has fallen that way. So I actually did a article on Draft Sharks a few weeks ago. It was called "Where Did Elite Fantasy Weeks Come From in 2021 Underdog Draft?" So it was exactly what the article title says. I looked at the average number of elite fantasy weeks. So I defined that as top 5 quarterback, top 12 running back, top 12 wide receiver, and top 5 tight end. And I looked at the average number of elite fantasy weeks you could expect to, you know, capture if you spent a fantasy pick on that position in a certain round. What I found was in last year's underdog drafts, 43% of top 12 running back weeks came in the first 2 rounds of fantasy drafts. By comparison, only 17% of top 12 wide receiver weeks came in the first 2 rounds. So I want to spend those early picks on running backs and try to capture as many of those elite weeks as I can, and then sort of ignore the position, because after those first 2 rounds, it gets flat at running back. Like, there's not much difference between running from, you know, round 3, 4 to round like 10, 11. It's kind of the same as far as how many of those elite weeks you're going to get. So I'm trying to scoop up as many of those elites as I can get, and then sort of ignore the running back position and attack wide receiver, maybe grab an elite quarterback and elite tight end.
Yeah, and I like that, and I love the data that you pulled from last year. I'm just wondering, though, it seems like this year the landscape has changed a little bit, where last year, you know, there was maybe 1 or 2 wide receivers going in the first round. Now we've got almost an even 50-50 split of wide receivers and running backs getting drafted earlier. It seems like, I don't know if it's just the time of year where we've got a lot of savvy people that are plugged in right now and pushing those running backs down the board. Maybe as we get closer to week 1, we see those running backs shoot up like we do so often. But, you know, the reason I think it's okay to mix in some wide receivers in the early rounds this year is because it feels like there's still really good value when you're getting into the 3rd and 4th round of your running backs. You know, guys like Ezekiel Elliott, Breece Hall, Cam Akers, J.K. Dobbins, they feel like 2nd round picks. Like, over what we've seen through the last few years, it seems like those guys should be going late 2nd, early 3rd round, but you can get them in the 4th and 5th round. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just a feel type thing. I don't have any data to back this up, but it does seem like there's a lot more wide receivers that are getting drafted earlier, and ADP is pushing some pretty valuable running backs down the board. Would you agree with that?
That's totally fair. And that's always the caveat when you're looking like back at 2021 stuff and applying it to 2022. Like, it's a completely different season. It might not play out the same way. So I don't want to say that's definitely the way to go. You have to take these RBs in the first 2 rounds. I'm with you. It does feel like, I mean, I'd throw Travis Etienne in that mix too, as a guy you can get in the 3rd or 4th round that feels like could be a second round pick. So yeah, I mean, again, you can definitely mix in a wide receiver or two in those first couple of rounds. I think you can be okay.
Cool. So let's stick with you, Jared. And I got another question for you here. I'm wondering, do you typically go into your draft, like when you see what number pick you are, whether it's 1, 5, 12, whatever, do you immediately say, all right, this is my plan in this draft? Or do you have to kind of wait to see how the board falls to you? At what point do you say, all right, this is my draft strategy? Is it the first round? Is it before you make your first pick, a few rounds in? When do you kind of develop your draft strategy?
Yeah, I think after you do enough of these drafts, especially if you're drafting on the same site like Underdog, you get your draft pick and you sort of know where ADP is going to guide you, because you don't want to reach too far beyond ADP. You just lose too much value. You're competing against so many other teams. You don't want to be taking a guy, in the mid first when other teams are getting him in the mid second. You're just losing too much value there. So your draft pick is going to guide the direction you take. But there's always surprises in drafts, especially outside the first couple of rounds. Like, you need to be willing to adjust on the fly and take value where it presents itself.
Yeah, and this is going to sound crazy, consumers that are listening to the show and have done a handful of best ball drafts, but yeah, I mean, where we're at with how many we've done, I mean, I can get the 8th pick, pull that, and be like, cool, I know if I get Stephon Diggs here at 8, then I'm going after, Josh Allen in round 3 and Gabe Davis in round 4, and you can kind of plan like rounds in advance after you've done enough of these. But for the casual guys, you're just going out there and getting your guys. Josh, same question over to you, though. Do you kind of go into these with a preconceived plan, or are you just playing the board and every draft is looking a little bit different for you?
I'll generally just play the board. I do mainly fast drafts, and I think with the 30-second clock on Underdog, a lot of other sites, it's a minute, 2 minutes, even depending on where you're drafting. So I think with the 30-second clock, you just get a lot of people, they panic on the clock. And I've noticed that there's pretty wild swings in ADP, even in the early rounds in some of these fast drafts, especially like, spoiler alert, if you want to draft late at night, you're probably going to get a lot of people that have been drinking and drafting, which I wouldn't really recommend. Or I wouldn't recommend doing that. I'd recommend being in the draft with them. And you'll get some pretty wild swings of guys going significantly earlier or later than expected. And that's how I kind of like to build my teams. And I think where you can kind of get kind of what Jared was saying, where it's like, you don't really want to reach a crazy amount to get a guy. I think you can get that natural differentiation just by doing some of those late night fast drafts where you're going to get some unique player combinations, and that I'm generally just scooping value early on based on how my rankings are and how I'm viewing these players. So I'll never just be like, all right, I've got the 6th pick. This is a 0 RB draft or anything like that. It'll really just depend on how that board falls for the first. I'd say it takes me usually 5 to 6 rounds actually for me to kind of know what my strategy is going to be like. I'm a big stacker, so I'm going to be like, all right, let's see who my early round receivers are. Do we have any stacks that I want to start setting up based on who those guys are and who I've picked already? So it really just depends after like the 5th, 6th round. Then I'm kind of like, all right, this is the game plan.
So one of my favorite strategies, and I don't even know if this is a strategy. I haven't heard of anybody else doing this outside of me, but I struggle so much with wanting to just get my guys in the early round that I have this strategy where I will join a draft and I won't touch it for the first 5 rounds. I will just ADP, just auto pick the first 5 rounds, kind of force
James is getting to you. What are you doing, Dave?
This was my idea. I'm the one that gave this to James, and that's why we do the show together. Yeah, we came up with this last offseason. And
James, what are you doing? Stealing from Dave? Because I saw him post a ton of Twitter stuff on Twitter where he was like, yeah, I just didn't look at it for 6 rounds. I didn't realize he needs to credit you more.
Yeah, and that's something, we do that on our show together, which you can find at youtube.com/footballguys, Tuesday afternoons, 3 p.m. Eastern time. Be sure to check it out, the Football Guys Best Ball Show, a ton of fun. But that's what we've done for a couple episodes. And I love it because it just forces me to diversify. When I'm looking at the first round and my rankings, I have Dalvin Cook ahead of Stephon Diggs, Najee Harris, Derrick Henry. So what happened is, picking the guys that I wanted, I ended up with 20% exposure on Dalvin Cook. And I realized, oh my God, if something happens to Dalvin Cook, my entire best ball season is done for. So then I just started auto picking the first 5 rounds. And then it kind of pushes you out of your comfort zone a little bit. It helps you go after some stacks that you're not as familiar with. I think it's a really fun way to draft personally. And for people that are doing volume drafting, if you're drafting a few hundred teams, try it out, because, there's a lot of guys that, Terry McLaurin was completely off my board. And now I've got a little bit of Terry McLaurin in some of my lineups just because I was forced to with this auto picking of the first 5 picks. But Josh, I also want to talk about what you said, getting into those late night drafts. I feel like you and I have a little bit of an advantage here. Me being in Colorado, you being out in California, we got 2-3 hours on all those East Coasters. So we're plugging in after dinner and everybody else is already hammed up, ready for bed.
I'm on the East Coast, and I have a 2-year-old that gets up at like 5 a.m. every morning. So I can't be staying up too late and drafting.
There you go. I mean, you could wake up in the morning and take advantage of the late night California drafters.
Yeah.
There you go.
Maybe that's the way to do it. Is then you get like the West Coast 2 a.m. drafters who
right.
I don't stay up that late. I assume if there are drafts going down at that time, that there's some pretty egregious picks. Would be my hunch.
Yeah, I'm gonna try that tomorrow morning.
I love it. It's a great idea. Let us know how that works out. I'm sure you'll see some, everybody attacking the Chargers stacks and the Rams stacks. So you go after all your East Coast guys. Next question I have, and this is kind of a softball question here, but what is your favorite spot to pick from? Josh, start us off here. You're waiting on that. You see the draft is starting now, and then you see where your pick is. What, like in the pit of your stomach, what pick are you hoping for every single time you draft?
I just want a top 5 pick. The way I see it is that we've got Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey at running back. We've got Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Cooper Kupp at receiver. I could see any of the 5 of those being the player that you just must have. And that it's like, oh, you didn't draft this guy. Sorry, you're not going to take down this tournament. You're not going to win your league, whatever it may be. I really just think after that, I've seen so many cases that the next pick should be Henry, should be Eckler, should be Diggs, like it should be Dalvin Cook. I've just like, there's so many people out there that will really vouch for a certain guy at 6. And I haven't heard a good enough reason from anyone to convince me that I need to have an auto pick at 6. But I feel like when I love just getting like the 4th or 5th pick, because then it's just like, all right, let's see which of the big 5 is there. So it's top 5 pick makes me smile.
Yeah. And it's great when you're sitting at that number 5 pick and, Christian McCaffrey drops to you because everyone's going for different players. I mean, it is nice when the decision gets made for you. But let's say you pull the number 1 pick. Are you taking Jonathan Taylor every single time, or are you switching that up a little bit?
I generally take Jonathan Taylor. I'm not super creative when I get the first pick. The way I see it is that if on average I'm getting the first pick 1 in 12 times, if I'm not taking Taylor there's a good chance I'm going to be underweight on Taylor. And my goal is to kind of be at or above the field with all 5 of those guys. And at least right now, I definitely am, because you'll see people take Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry. I've even seen like Travis Kelce go there if someone's really obsessed with tight ends. So then when you have like the 6th pick, you can end up sometimes 6th or 7th pick, like you might sneak in one of those or my top 5.
So Jared, I saw you nodding quite a bit. Are you kind of in the same agreement that you're just hoping for one of those top 5 picks?
Totally. I want a top 5 pick in the first round. Even like in the second round, I feel like it's kind of flat. Like, I don't think the early second round picks, I don't like those guys much more than later second round picks. And then in the third round, I like a lot of the early third round players. I think Leonard Fournette gets there. T. Higgins gets there sometimes. And I do think there's a bit of a drop off when you get to the back half of round 3. So I almost feel like if you pick in the top 5, you're potentially gaining value in the first round, second round, and third round. So I definitely feel like, and this is probably going to end up being completely wrong when we get to the end of the season, but it sure feels like a top 5 pick is where you want to be this
yeah,
year.
same. Yeah, I like that second, third round. It does feel like it sets you up. You just look at your top 3 picks and you're like, wow, this just looks fundamentally better than the person picking at the end of the first round.
Yep.
Yeah, and for people that don't have ADP memorized, let me just kind of rattle some of these off right here. So if you end up with one of those top 5 picks, when you get to the back half of the second round, you're looking at Leonard Fournette, Tyreek Hill, T. Higgins, Javonte Williams. To start off the third round, you're looking at Nick Chubb, A.J. Brown, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. So you're starting off with, one of the top 5 guys we talked about, and then 2 of those guys that I just mentioned as well. And then, like you said, it kind of falls off after that. When you're looking at the back half of the third round, there's a few guys that jump out to me. DJ Moore, if he slides. Kyle Pitts, I think, is a fantastic value there. Travis Etienne is a guy who is now creeping into the third round. But really, when you're looking at James Conner and Alvin Kamara with his possible suspension, Marquise Brown, Cortland Sutton, Jalen Waddle, there's a lot of risk baked into that back half of the third round. So I'm completely with you. It feels like you get a huge advantage with the early pick. But like you said, come middle of the season, who knows how this is actually going to look. We think we know everything now, but let's see how it actually plays out in a few weeks here. Now, the most common builds that you see are 2 quarterbacks, 2 tight ends, and then, you'll have a few more receivers than running backs, assuming that you're kind of picking all throughout the board here. But I want you guys to choose one. If you had to go with 3 quarterbacks or 3 tight ends, what would you prefer and why? Jared, start me off here.
Yeah, so for me, I think more often than quarterbacks, it's tight ends. So, my build style, if I get an elite at either of those positions, that's when I'm going to plan on just drafting 2 of them. If I don't get what I consider an elite, and that's really the top like 4, 5, 6 guys at both positions. If I don't get an elite, I'm going to be taking 3 of those guys. So I find myself more often taking an elite quarterback. That's in part because I just like the value on those elite quarterbacks more than the values on the elite tight ends. I like the late round tight end options more than I like the late round quarterback options. So that might push me more to the elite quarterback. And then also I think there's an added bonus of if you take that third tight end, that guy can start in the flex for you too. Whereas, the quarterback can't. So I do think there's some added value to, taking that third tight end.
Yeah, and that's something that dawned on me early this offseason. I said, why am I not taking 3 tight ends in all my drafts? Because it's raising your weekly floor, the production you get. Because realistically, if you're punting on tight ends, if you're not paying up for one of those top 5 guys, really all you're hoping for is that one of these guys is going to stumble into the end zone on any given week. So I think that by drafting a third tight end, you're raising your weekly floor and your possibility that one of these guys is going to score a touchdown. And like you said, then if 2 guys end up going off, one of them just gets flexed and it's not really going to count against you. So I've been doing that for quite a while, but now it seems like a lot of people are starting to adopt that philosophy. And where you used to be able to get Evan Ingram and Hayden Hurst in the final rounds, now if you wait until round 18 for your third tight end, you're getting down to, the Mo Alley Cox, Jonnu Smith, Logan Thomas. You're really, really scraping the barrel there. So, it's kind of this weird balance because now if you want to go the 3 tight end route, it almost feels like you need to pay up in rounds like 13, 14, and 15 rather than waiting till the very end of your draft. But Josh, I want you to talk about this a little bit. I mean, do you find yourself drafting more 3 quarterback builds or more 3 tight end builds, or do you try really as much as you can to adhere to just 2 and 2?
I generally stick with 2 and 2 when possible, but definitely 3 tight end is where I'll lean. Similar to what Jared said, like you can have an extra tight end hopping into the flex if you want. And then the other thing is that with the scoring system of Underdog, it's half PPR. There's no yardage bonuses. Basically, like it's nuking all the position players that catch passes, and it doesn't affect the quarterbacks. So the quarterbacks proportionally are scoring a ton of points on Underdog compared to if this were a PPR format. So right there, already it's like, okay, well, we want a good quarterback. Then the other thing is that quarterback ADP is generally the most efficient position in terms of ADP. And it's because what are we good at as analysts? We're really bad at player takes. We're really good at offense takes. And we're generally aware of like, hey, this is an offense that's going to score a lot of points, or this is a quarterback that's ridiculously mobile, and the scoring for quarterbacks favors mobility. So we're really good with quarterbacks. So because of that, I find myself often taking one of the better quarterbacks. So I don't want to say any names yet, but I'll be talking about one of my favorite middle round quarterbacks pretty soon.
Yeah, and on that note, Josh, you set us up for such a great transition here into the next segment that I want to talk about. You said it yourself. We are awful at player takes. So let's get into some player takes now and talk about round by round some of the guys that we're targeting specifically here, because, it's definitely is better to focus on team construction and building around certain offenses. But at the end of the day, we do have players that we like and guys that we're targeting. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit in the back half of this show. So Jared, start us off here. We're going to break it up kind of round by round here. Rounds 1 through 3, who is one guy that you find yourself overexposed to and you cannot stop drafting in those early rounds?
It's Saquon Barkley for me, and I loved when he was available in the 3rd round. He's like up into the mid-second now. Yep. I'll be willing to take Saquon in the late 1st if I have to. I just look at his profile. Like, to me, durability is the only knock against him, and all running backs are injury prone. Like, it's a riskier position than wide receiver for sure. Saquon's still only 25 years old. He's another year removed from the ACL. We know that guys are better once they get past that first year beyond the ACL injury. So I think that's going to help Saquon. The ankle injury last year was totally fluky. I think the Giants coaching move from, Jason Garrett, Freddie Kitchens to Brian Dable is like maybe the biggest coaching upgrade in the NFL this season. So that's going to help Saquon, obviously. The offensive line should be better. They added Evan Neal in the 1st round. Andrew Thomas already emerged as, one of the better tackles in the league last season. So that's going to help. And then the biggest thing with Saquon is like, where else are the running back touches going in this backfield? It's Matt Breida, Antonio Williams, and Gary Brightwell behind him on the depth chart. Like, they did not add anything. If Saquon's healthy, he's going to be top 5 in terms of volume. I still think he's a big time talent. So again, to me, he should be a late 1st round pick, and he's still going in the 2nd.
Yeah, and when you look at his receiving numbers last year, obviously he struggled with injuries, and that's kind of been the theme of Saquon Barkley's career. But his receiving numbers last year were just elite, no matter how you look at it, efficiency, volume, you name it. And one other thing I want to talk about, you talk about how Saquon Barkley was going in the 3rd, 4th round. One of my favorite comments, and I get this almost every single day on Twitter, even now when we're in mid-July, people say, "Who's drafting now?" or "Why are you drafting so early?" And I just want to say that is the best time to draft. I mean, when I was drafting back in, what was it, March, April, you were getting Saquon Barkley in the 4th round. You were getting Leonard Fournette in the 5th round. You were getting Allen Lazard as your final 18th round pick. So for people that think it's kind of crazy to put on that fantasy hat and start drafting really early in the offseason, that's when you can get some tremendous value. So I'd recommend doing it. If you're watching this show right now, next year, as soon as the Super Bowl is over, go ahead and hop in some underdog drafts and see if you can take advantage of some good values there. But Josh, same question over to you. Rounds 1 through 3, who is a guy that you find yourself consistently targeting?
I have a lot of T. Higgins. I know that some people are like, "Oh, T. Higgins, you're drafting a second wide receiver on a team early on." And to that, I just say, well, analyze where spike weeks come from, analyze where high-performing receivers come from. They usually come from the same few offenses. They need to come from an offense that has a really good quarterback and an offense that's going to pass the ball a good amount. What we kind of saw towards the end of last year was that the Bengals were leaning more pass-heavy. They fortified the offensive line. Joe Mixon's not getting any younger. It really feels to me like they want Joe Burrow to drop back and throw the ball deep. When you have Chase and Higgins, I mean, the game plan to me, it's pretty obvious. This might be the best wide receiver duo of the last 10 years at least. I really feel like with T. Higgins, he outscored Jamar Chase in the second half of the season in fantasy. He had the early season shoulder injury that he overcame. Do I prefer Chase? Do I think he has more upside? Yeah, of course. That's why Chase is a top 5 pick generally. But late 2nd round, early 3rd round, I just cannot stop drafting T. Higgins. You're getting a mid-20s target share on one of the best offenses in football, and he himself is just a supreme talent. So I feel like you're ultimately just buying the discount of, oh, he's the second receiver there. So I love Higgins. It sets you up for the Burrow stack if you want it. And it just feels like one of the safest picks you can make that still has crazy upside. I mean, if anything happens to Chase, Higgins could be the wide receiver 1 in fantasy. So a lot of Higgins.
And we talk so much about how, the Buffalo and Cincinnati guys, they're just boosted in ADP because everyone wants that week 17 correlation that helped so much last year. But Higgins is the one guy who hasn't really budged in value. Like we see Gabriel Davis climbing up. We see Stephon Diggs moving up into the middle of the 1st round now. But for whatever reason, it seems like Higgins is staying stagnant. And I think it's what you said, Josh, is that a lot of people, some more casual drafters say, well, I don't want a wide receiver too, without really peeling back the numbers and looking that when he came back and he was fully healthy, he was earning more targets per game than Jamar Chase was. So I'm with you. I mean, Jamar Chase has that game-breaking upside where he can, finish the year with 500, 600, 700 yards after the catch. I don't think T. Higgins has that. But T. Higgins is a guy, like you said, that's going to see a mid-20% target share on a team that might throw the ball 650 times. So I'm with you. I can't draft enough of T. Higgins. Let's move a little bit further down the draft, though. We're outside of the top 3 rounds. Looking at rounds 4 through 6 now. Josh, who's the guy there that you are really targeting in rounds 4 through 6?
Let's talk about an elite quarterback option. He goes somewhere in the 6th round. Generally, it's Jalen Hurts. I can't stop drafting Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts was the QB6 per game last year, despite Jalen Reagor, Quez Watkins playing these heavy snaps, despite it being his first year as a starter. What did they do? The offensive line's getting healthier. They go out and trade for A.J. Brown. This just seems to me like if he was the QB6 per game with a below average supporting cast in his first year as a starter, and he didn't even play all that well at times. I mean, he could be the QB1 in fantasy. I think it's actually pretty likely that he's going to finish top 3. Like my hot take all off season, it's not as hot anymore because of ADP, but it was always that I think Jalen Hurts is going to outscore Patrick Mahomes straight up in fantasy points. Now they go in like within 5 picks of each other on underdog. So it's like no longer a hot take. But back when they went like 3-4 rounds apart, I was like, oh, like, this is my hot take. So I'm going to give myself a pat on the back for that. The people have realized that Jalen Hurts has pretty ridiculous upside. So it just seems to me like I don't see how he fails with the rushing and with the receiving talent surrounding him. And when I did projections, he was my QB2 behind Josh Allen. It seems like no matter how I've sliced and diced it, I don't see a world where Jalen Hurts isn't scoring as a top 3 to 5 quarterback. And I think he has QB1 firmly in the range of outcomes.
Couldn't agree more with all that. And something you didn't even mention is that mid-season, he actually picked up an ankle injury. Prior to that ankle injury, he was the overall QB1. He was outscoring every quarterback, and then he tweaked his ankle and his rushing dropped off a little bit. But yeah, I mean, say what you want about his real life abilities on a football field and his accuracy issues, but it just doesn't matter when you run the way that he does. I mean, there's a reason that Miles Sanders didn't have a touchdown last season, and it's because when they get inside the 5-yard line, Jalen Hurts is just laser focused on getting into the end zone on his own attrition. So completely with that. The one thing I'll say is with Jalen Hurts and Kyler Murray being so close in ADP, I love both of those guys this year. So my kind of strategy when it comes to drafting a quarterback in that round is just take whichever one of those two guys drops, whether it's Jalen Hurts or Kyler Murray. I am so overweight on both of those guys. It seems like every single time I'm in the 6th round, I just take whichever quarterback is still available there. Jared, same question to you though. Who's a guy in rounds 4 to 6 that you keep drafting?
We're on the same page here because my guy is Kyler Murray, and I think the overarching theme is I think you want to get one of those elite quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. And, Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts pretty consistently are the last two. It's always Josh Allen first, and it's usually like Herbert, Mahomes, and then Lamar Jackson. And then Kyler and Hurts go, half a round later than those guys. So that's why, Kyler and Hurts are my two favorite guys. I mean, we know Kyler Murray, one of the best running quarterbacks in the NFL. He actually has the 3rd most rushing fantasy points among quarterbacks over the last 3 years, behind only Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. He's also been improving every year as a passer. You look at completion rate, PFF passing grade, adjusted yards per attempt. He's improved those metrics each of his 3 years in the NFL. He was actually top 4 in the league in completion rate, yards per attempt, and PFF passing grade last year. So he has that combination of like elite rushing ability. And I think he's underrated as a passer. The DeAndre Hopkins suspension obviously sucks, but once he comes back, in week 7, with Hopkins and Marquise Brown there now, and hopefully we get more out of Rondale Moore, and we have Zach Ertz there for the whole season. Like, this might be Kyler's best group of weapons he's had since entering the NFL. So yeah, I love him. If I can get Kyler in the 5th round, 6th round is just the cherry on top. I think it's a great value, and he's a real difference maker, I think, on fantasy teams.
Yeah, and you didn't even mention AJ Green, who was left for dead 2 years ago in Cincinnati, mm-hmm. and saw a little bit of a resuscitation last year and did all right in Arizona. Got Darrell Williams, who I think is just as good as Chase Edmonds, and he's going to slot right into that role as a receiving back. There are just so many weapons in Arizona. I'm with you. Again, I just talked about SFB a little bit, but I had Kyler Murray as my number 2 overall pick in SFB. I had the 9th overall pick, and he slid me there, and I couldn't believe it with the boost for accuracy and the rushing first downs and all that. I mean, I think he's going to be set up for a huge year. I think the biggest knock on Kyler Murray is that for the last few seasons now, he's gotten injured down the stretch. Started the season, a little bit colder, or ended the season a little bit colder than he started it, and people just have goldfish brains. They just remember what they saw recently. Like, recency bias just plagues fantasy managers every single year. So they see him struggle in the playoffs, and then all offseason, Kyler Murray's a discount. And here we are again, 3rd year in a row where you could just take advantage of getting Kyler Murray for really cheap. And the last thing I'll say about this is, like you said, sometimes it's just best to just get the cheapest of the elite guys. And I think that's a very clear-cut top 6 with Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts. You just want one of those 6. And it just feels gross paying up in the 3rd round for Josh Allen, because after that, then you're looking at guys who have high upside, but they need extreme efficiency to get there. Joe Burrow, Russell Wilson, Tom Brady, Dak Prescott. These guys aren't going to be rushing for a ton of yards. So the only way that they're cracking into that elite tier and finishing as a top 3, top 2 quarterback is if they're throwing 650, 700 times, or if they're, doing what Aaron Rodgers has done the last couple of years and throwing a touchdown on 7 or 8% of their passes. That's the only way you're really getting that production out of those guys. So let's move on now. Now we are past round 6, round 7 through 9. Jared, who's a guy in that area that you keep consistently targeting?
Yeah, so Dallas Goedert is my favorite tight end value, and this is the range he's going. And I think he should at least be going up where like Dalton Schultz and TJ Hockenson are going. I even like Goedert straight up over those guys, but he goes, consistently 1 to 2 rounds after them. So, we all waited for years to, have Goedert freed of Zach Ertz, and it finally happened, for the final 2/3 of last season. And Ertz capitalized on it. He was tight end 5 in fantasy points in his 10 healthy games without Zach Ertz last season. 24.7% target share for Dallas Goedert in those 10 games. That would have been 2nd among tight ends on the season. Now that's going to drop a bit with AJ Brown in town, but I think that drop in target share is going to be offset by the Eagles just passing the ball more. They were dead last in pass attempts last season, and it was a funky season in Philly. They started the year so pass heavy, it didn't really work. Then they went super run heavy for the final, 10 or so games of the season, and they were better. But I mean, I think after adding AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts having another year of experience in this offense, that pass rate's going to climb. So I think that's going to help offset the loss of target share that Goedert is probably going to see with AJ Brown in town. And the other thing about Dallas Goedert, he's just really good at football. He's finished top 10 among tight ends in yards per route run in each of the past 3 seasons, including a second place finish last year. Only George Kittle was better in terms of yards per route run than Dallas Goedert last year. So again, I just think he's going like 2-3 rounds later than he should.
So Jared, now we're getting to the point, in the mid rounds where, the first 2 guys that we talked about were easy. Those are slam dunks. And now we're getting to the point where, we're getting a little bit more speculative and there is some risk here. So I'll push back a little bit on Dallas Goedert. One, and you talked about this, obviously his target share is going to go down just a tad with AJ Brown. But I think when you look at his season long numbers, they're a little bit deceiving because of the 2-game sample size that he had with Gardner Minshew. And I was just looking at these numbers last night, but in those 2 games with Gardner Minshew, he averaged over twice as many fantasy points per game. He saw a 60% increase in targets. So I'm a little bit concerned that when you look at those overall numbers, those 2 games are really inflating it. He averaged 22 fantasy points per game in the 2 games that Gardner Minshew started. And I feel like because of that, he's getting a little bit overdrafted. And then the last thing I'll say about Dallas Goedert is just drafting those mid-round tight ends. I feel like every single year we see these guys get pushed up into that mid-round area, and very rarely do they actually pay off. So I think that there is some inherent risk in drafting Dallas Goedert for a multitude of reasons. But when you're in the 7th, 8th, 9th round, everybody has risk. So I'm not trying to push back on you too hard here. But you got any last points that you want to hammer home with Dallas Goedert?
Yeah, it's a fair point. I mean, and it's all, football's all small sample sizes. Even what I mentioned, 10 games, that's like nothing. But again, I just think this guy's really good. And I think like everyone thought that for years. Like everyone's like, Zach Ertz is just holding Dallas Goedert back. This guy's an awesome talent. And like he has been by any metric you look at. And now like Zach Ertz is not in the picture. The other note I'll make here too is Nick Sirianni comes from Frank Reich's coaching tree. And that offense has historically targeted tight ends at an above league average rate. And I just think that's going to continue. Like you have AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, but there's like nothing else a wide receiver beyond that. So it should be a pretty concentrated, target tree. I think Goddard can still, top a 20% target share. And that's a mark only like 4 or 5 tight ends hit last season. So I do think he's still going to be, in the top 6, 7 tight ends in terms of targets.
I like it. And I like the Frank Reich call out because, everybody says, they can kind of attribute that to the players that he had. But when Ertz went down, they plugged in Richard Rodgers and gave him like a 25% target share. So I'm with you. That you make a good point there with the coaching tree and where he comes from. Josh, if you got anything you want to add on Dallas Goedert, feel free, or we can hear about who you're drafting in these mid rounds that you really like.
No, I don't think anything that hasn't been said is anything that I want to say. I liked the back and forth on Goddard. Now I'm just curious if Dave's lurking, and then I'm going to talk about my player, and he's be like, let me tell you why this is a bad pick.
I mean, hey, it makes for good content, all right? If we're just sitting here, blowing smoke and telling each other that their takes are great, it gets boring. So sometimes I think the little pushback, a little bit of discourse makes for a good show.
Yeah, I think so. We're gonna see Dave's exposure later, Jared, and it's gonna be like 30% Dallas Goedert.
Like, he'd be set up perfectly if that's the case.
So my guy, it's Skyy Moore. Let's talk about the Chiefs offense as it's currently constructed with the pass catchers. We have Travis Kelce. He turns 33 years old in October. All of his efficiency metrics this past year, target share, yards per route run, targets per route run, basically any number you want to look at was the lowest that he'd had in the past 6-7 years. Then we have Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Career high target share, 14%. Career catch rate below 50%. I think at this point we know what Marquez Valdes-Scantling is. He is a situational field stretcher. He played with Aaron Rodgers. So I always hate when people are like, oh, he's playing with Mahomes. I'm like, okay. So I guess Aaron Rodgers is terrible at football. Yes, I understand the volume is going to be better because it's a higher pass volume offense, but this is just not a guy that we've ever seen take a significant share of an offense before. I don't think it's going to happen. It's not like he was competing with incredible players in Green Bay for that number 2 receiver role. It wasn't like it was Devontae Adams and then like, I know Dave likes Allen Lazard. I think Allen Lazard's pretty good, but I wouldn't say that this was some elite number 2 receiver that was keeping MVS from production. Then who's next? We've got Juju Smith-Schuster, the guy where you have to go back 5 years to remember the glory days. Juju Smith-Schuster has been terrible the last 3 seasons, 19, 20, 20. The last 3 seasons, 19, 20, 21. This has not been a good player. PFF thinks he's been pretty god-awful. He's suffered injuries. He's suffered from inefficiency. At this point, he's kind of a big slot only player who has been really inefficient. If we look at last year, he got injured in game 5, but if you look at the first 4 weeks, he was being out-targeted by Deontay Johnson. He was being out-targeted by Chase Claypool. He was being out-targeted by Najee Harris. And on top of that, Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool only played 3 of the first 4 games. So Juju had the advantage, still couldn't out-target them. He just feels like a kind of situational big slot role player as well. Then we have Mecole Hardman. Mecole Hardman's a bust. He has never done anything. I don't know why people are starting to expect him to do something just because he played with Patrick Mahomes before. Mecole Hardman, just really concerning trend of the ADOT precipitously declining. It's like they tried him out as a deep threat. They tried him out as an intermediate threat, and they said, you know what? We just want you to be a gadget guy. And that leads us to Skyy Moore. And you might say, all right, you think he's just going to walk into this opportunity because of all these guys? And I'm like, you know what? Actually, I think he could, because Skyy Moore is really good at football. He went to Western Michigan on a full scholarship. He had never played receiver in high school, not once. He tried receiver, and he ended up leading the team as a true freshman in receiving yards. The year 2, he upped his receiving yards per game. COVID shortened season. He only plays a few games. Year 3, he leads the MAC conference in touchdowns. He has over 100 receiving yards a game. You can look at all these PFF metrics. The guy was just absolutely ridiculously efficient. Man coverage, zone coverage. Doesn't matter what route he's running. Skyy Moore was consistently getting open, consistently creating yards after the catch. And it's actually a pretty rare thing. I know some point and they're like, hey, there were 10, 11, 12 receivers drafted before him in the draft. They go, hey, how can you like the guy that was drafted after all of these dudes? And it's because I think the way we should frame it is this was a small school Western Michigan receiver who only had a 2.5-year sample size playing in college because his sophomore year was cut short due to COVID. And in only a 2.5-year sample size, he impressed NFL teams enough to go in the second round after never playing wide receiver in high school. This is a supreme talent on a pass-heavy offense, and there is opportunity up for grabs. I think he's good enough to take it. He's kind of my pick for later round wide receiver that I think has a really strong case to end up finishing top 24 at the position.
So, my initial pushback that I wanted to, I just felt disgust when you said Skyy Moore because he's a guy that I just am not even thinking twice about drafting. And now you're kind of forcing me to look at my own, preconceived notions here. And I think what happened is I got turned off by Skyy Moore during dynasty season. When everyone was doing their dynasty rookie drafts, Skyy Moore was shooting up draft boards and getting drafted ahead of guys like George Pickens and Christian Watson and, James Cook. And he was going in like the mid to back half of the first round. And I think that's what really turned me off to Skyy Moore. But as you're sitting here talking about it, I think that I might need to reevaluate my take a little bit. And the main thing, too, is just when you're looking at team construction, you obviously want to buy into Kansas City. And he is the 3rd cheapest wide receiver out of the bunch. And that's not even talking about Travis Kelce, who's going in the first round. But between Juju, MVS, and Skyy Moore is the cheapest. So I think Skyy Moore is a guy that I need to start drafting a little bit more. And thanks for that wake-up moment, because I just checked, and I'm at 1.8% and $25 on Skyy Moore. And I think I need a little bit more than that. So thanks for the wake-up call, Josh. I think I really needed that. But again, we're just going to keep moving down a little bit. So here we are, talking about Skyy Moore and Dallas Goedert in rounds 7 through 9. Jared, now we are over to round 10 through 12. Who is a guy that you're targeting here?
Rachaad White for me, rookie running back for the Bucs. And honestly, I think he's probably just a pure handcuff. I don't expect him to, push Leonard Fournette for that job just because the, rapport that Fournette has built with Tom Brady, we know how important that is. But I just think if anything happens to Fournette, I think White has league winning upside. I think he has an awesome prospect profile. You look at, big rushing production across, it was only, 15 games at Arizona State. So it is a limited sample, but he averaged 95 rushing yards, 1.3 rushing touchdowns per game. Also averaged 3.4 catches and 40 receiving yards per game. He was 2nd in PFF receiving grade among 109 running backs with 20-plus targets last year, 5th among those 109 in yards per out run. So to me, he looks like the best pass-catching running back in this class, and he's joining a Bucs offense. And, Brady throughout his career has targeted running backs heavily, going back to the Patriots days, those guys like James White, Deion Lewis. So, again, if Fournette goes down, I think White's going to step in, maybe not 100% of Fournette's role, but, 80, 90% of Fournette's role. And Fournette, from week 4 to 14 last season, he was 2nd among running backs in expected fantasy points per game. He was 4th in actual points per game. So again, I think White has RB1 potential if something happens to Fournette. And, in these best ball tournaments, when you get to double-digit rounds, you want guys with upside, guys that can, put your team in that top 1 percentile. And I think White has that upside.
And I love that you qualified it right off the bat, because I've heard so many people saying, you got to draft this guy, Rachaad White. He's so good. They're not going to keep him off the field. And I don't agree with that, just because of, like you said, the rapport that he has with that Leonard Fournette and Tom Brady have. And another huge thing is the pass blocking. Leonard Fournette has really improved as a pass blocker over the last few years, and that is just so important at this stage in Tom Brady's career. But I think with the expectation that he's an elite handcuff, I completely agree with that. And when you look at where he's getting drafted, he's the immediate pick right after Alexander Mattison. So I think that his ADP has kind of naturally just settled into a place where he is getting valued as a very high-end handcuff. Like you said, you're going for upside. Realistically, if Leonard Fournette is healthy, I think that he's getting the lion's share of the work there. And Rachaad White's probably going to struggle to get on the field, but Leonard Fournette has missed games. I'm pretty sure, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think every single year. Yeah. And it's, it's always nagging injuries. It's been a while since he's had a serious injury, but he's just a guy with how hard he plays, seeking and loving contact on the field. He's good to miss, 1, 2, 3 games every single season. So yeah, if you're getting a guy that can get plugged in, a young guy on fresh legs that's going to get plugged into an explosive offense, even if you get a handful of weeks out of him where he's putting up that RB1 value, he's paying off at that ADP. So I love that call out, Jared.
Fournette's a little chubby right now, too. I don't know if you guys have seen that. So that's something worth keeping an eye on when we get to training camp.
Uncle Lenny is back.
Yeah, it's to the best of us, man. It's a long winter, and, I don't even have a reason for it. He's partying all off season, and, his team making a deep playoff run. I just get fat because I like turkey and beer during the winter. I don't even have a good reason. Josh, same question over to you, though. Looking at these, mid to late rounds, 10 through 12, who's a guy that you're consistently targeting there?
So I've got to say, I'm pretty glad I didn't say Rachaad White and have that written down, because that's definitely like one of my 2 or 3 most drafted in this round for basically everything that Jared said, like just ridiculous upside.
And for all the listeners, if you're listening to this, we did not compare notes before the show. So I got to say, I'm shocked that we made it this far and we haven't had 2 of the same guys yet. We probably should have compared notes before we started airing, but here we are just freeballing it.
Yeah, so if I had to give 3 names, he would have been one of them. I'll give you a different name. I really like Jarvis Landry. Mm-hmm. Jarvis Landry is so boring, right? This is a possession receiver. He got injured last year. He's around 30 years old. He's playing in the Saints offense. We don't know what to make of it. And then we take a step back, we look, and we see that the guy is top 12 in targets per route run literally every single season, pretty much including last year. This is a guy that just absolutely feasts on targets. There is almost no one out there with a track record like Jarvis Landry when it comes to commanding targets. Sort of like what I said with T. Higgins, where I'm like, you want a guy that has a really, really safe floor and decent upside whenever possible. Jarvis Landry fits that bill. He is one of the latest wide receivers where I comfortably feel like, okay, this is someone that's going to be slotting in a pretty heavy amount to my lineup. I think with the way the Saints are constructed right now, we've got a lot of question marks. Kamara could get suspended. Michael Thomas, is this the longest ankle sprain recovery that we've ever seen? It's pushing 2 years at this point. I've seen some videos of him running, not at full speed. And that's pretty concerning that if 2 years into this injury, we are still not even seeing him running full speed routes. Chris Olave is a rookie. I think he's probably going to be pretty good, but still he's a rookie. And we've got Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry just feels like the kind of guy that's going to command 20-something% of the targets, going to have 800-900 yards, maybe 4 to 7 touchdowns. And you go, you know what? Jarvis Landry was a strong contributor to my roster. And I think that he's kind of the perfect balance of, yes, I really like swinging on upside. Like I take a lot of Rachaad White. Rachaad White could give you zeros for most of the season. And I think Landry is like a perfect guy to balance with some of those high upside picks where you're swinging and it's like, hey, you take out, let's say you have Alexander Mattison and Rachaad White on your team. There's a good chance like only one of those guys is actually doing something. But when he's doing something, he's doing it big, 20 fantasy points a game. Landry just feels like the kind of guy that's going to give you a ton of weeks of 10 to 15 fantasy points. And from all my research into underdog and who's entering your lineup, generally receivers are entering your lineup anytime they score 8 to 10 fantasy points. And Landry's going to do that over and over again and then some. So this is just someone that no matter what your receiver build looks like, he's going to be a part of it. And he's going just far too late. I think he's the kind of guy that I think should be a top 100 pick, and you can get him in the late 120s.
Yeah, he's kind of a budget Brandon Cooks. He's not fun. He's not sexy. He's not going to have these huge boom weeks, but he's going to give you consistent production every single week. So I'm with you on Jarvis Landry 100%. I can't push back on this one. Jarvis Landry is one of my most rostered receivers as well. But Jared, back over to you. I think I lost track here. Are we moving on to the next rounds, or do you still have a? No. You just talked
Next
about.
rounds.
So we're on to rounds 13 to 15 now. And we'll each talk about two more guys before we round up here. Rounds 13 to 15. Jared, who is a guy that you are targeting there?
That's Van Jefferson for me. I don't even like the guy as a player. I don't think he's that good, but I just think he's free money. He's wide receiver 67 right now, an underdog. I think he's going to be in a similar role as what he played last year. He was an 80% snap guy in a top 5 passing game. He finished wide receiver 36 in PPR points. He was wide receiver 37 in expected fantasy points. He had 6 top 24 scoring weeks. And again, I just think you're going to have Allen Robinson just step into the role that Robert Woods played for the first half of the season, then Odell Beckham played for the second half. Van Jefferson's going to be in the same role. Tutu Atwell is not going to take his job. Tutu Atwell weighs like 120 pounds.
Forgot about him.
Jefferson's he's just safe. And I do think there's additional upside. I think Allen Robinson's going to bounce back, but if he doesn't, if he's the player he was in Chicago last season, then Van Jefferson could take on an even bigger role in this offense.
Yeah. And, we talked about it with the quarterbacks, with Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts, and kind of taking whichever one's the cheapest. There's 3 wide receivers that are all bunched together right around Van Jefferson, where I'm kind of taking the same approach, where it's Josh Palmer, KJ Osborne, Van Jefferson. All 3 of those guys have very similar ADPs. They're all the wide receiver 3 on what we expect to be very good offenses, and they're teams that run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. So they're going to see opportunity, and they're going to have some boom games here and there. So I'm with you. Whether it's Josh Palmer, Van Jefferson, or KJ Osborne, it seems like I am leaving almost every single draft with one of those 3 receivers. Josh, did I steal your thunder? Were you going to talk about one of those guys, or did you have somebody else that you wanted to mention in these rounds?
No, so I like all 3 of those guys as well, but my guy is actually cheating. I looked at the ADP after I wrote him down. He actually goes at pick 181 currently. I don't know when he fluctuated out of the 170 range. So he's technically not a 13 to 15 pick. I'm going to go with him anyway. It's KJ Hamler. Yes. KJ Hamler, what do we know about KJ Hamler? He plays in a really good offense. He plays with Russell Wilson. What do we know about Russell Wilson? Russell Wilson likes the deep ball. He's very, very good at it. Who is the fastest receiver on this team by quite a bit? It is Hamler. KJ Hamler. Jerry Jeudy, not really a burner. Cortland Sutton is slow. And Tim Patrick is slow. Feels to me like there's a decent chance that end of the day, would it shock anyone if for some reason KJ Hamler is the one that's his favorite deep threat? It wouldn't really surprise me. I think that this is actually slightly more of an ambiguous wide receiver depth chart than ADPs would suggest, where you have round 3 or end of round 3 Sutton, you've got round 4 Jeudy, Patrick's in round 9 or 10, and then Hamler's in the 15th round. It just feels like that's just way too far of a gap when KJ Hamler's got the round 2 draft capital. He had a solid rookie season, a 13% target share as a rookie. When you're a deep threat with bad quarterback play is actually not half bad. Gets injured at the start of last season. All reports are that he's going to most likely be full go for week 1. And I just think that there's some upside there in terms of what if for some reason this is not the wide receiver 4, because he is so confidently being drafted as the wide receiver 4. And even if he is the wide receiver 4 and he's a situational deep threat, I don't mind at pick 180 taking Russell Wilson's situational deep threat. So another one where it seems like the floor is at least where he's being drafted. And then the ceiling is that this guy ends up giving you top 36 fantasy points per game when all said and done. He could have Van Jefferson's year from last year. And that wouldn't be that big of a shock to me.
Yeah. And you talk about how you only need 8 to 10 points to get into a lineup. Well, guess what? A 50-yard touchdown. That's it right there. KJ Hamler catches a 50-yard touchdown, and he's getting into your lineup that week. And the other thing I want to say, you talked about how his rookie season, he put up solid numbers despite poor quarterback play, but you undersold it a bit. And just for people that don't have, memories here, the quarterback play in 2020, we're looking at starts from Drew Lock, Jeff Driscoll, Brett Ripon, and then everybody forgets about that Kendall Hinton game. It was terrible in 2020. They literally had to start a practice squad wide receiver at quarterback that season. So for him to do anything at all as the third option is impressive in itself. But I'm with you. I think it's a very ambiguous situation still in Denver. And I think Cortland Sutton is kind of the clear-cut number 1 from the reports that we're getting out of camp. I don't even know if Jerry Jeudy is a clear-cut wide receiver too. I mean, we're getting good reports about Tim Patrick. We're hearing about KJ Hamler. I think there is still a ton of uncertainty there that you can leverage. So the fact that KJ Hamler is sliding in ADP outside of where this was when you prepped notes a few days ago blows my mind, because he is just moving in the wrong direction, and you should go out and get as much KJ Hamler as you can. All right, we're going to wrap up here with our final two guys, and we're talking about the very final rounds here. So, Jared, start us off. Who are some guys that you are targeting in the final rounds of your draft?
Yeah, I mean, do you want to have the Deshaun Watson conversation? Because, like, to me, unless you're 100% sure that he's going to be suspended for the entire season, like, he should be your 18th round target on Underdog. Because, like, first of all, it's an 18th round pick. Like, most of these guys aren't going to do anything for you anyways. Second of all we care about on Underdog, especially in later rounds, is upside. Like, we know all the money's in the final few weeks. And if Deshaun Watson is not suspended for the entire season, you're going to have him, in the Underdog playoffs when you need those spike scoring weeks. And I just think he is going to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback, probably even top, 6, 7 when he's on the field, top 5. Yeah. Like he's an elite fantasy quarterback. And I just think the risk, and, you can talk about the off-field stuff. The guy's obviously a bad dude, but, like, it's fantasy football. Like, I'm trying to just score fantasy points. And I just think, again, unless you think you're 100% sure he's not going to play this season, he's worth the risk in the 18th round.
Yeah, I mean, even if he's suspended for half a year, he should still be getting drafted as a top 12, top 15 quarterback. And, the reason he's not getting drafted there now is because there's fear that he's suspended for the entire season, doesn't play at all, in which case he's a wasted pick. But like you said, getting him in the 18th round, if he's suspended for 4, 6, 8 games, you're getting him when you need him most. I mean, those early season games, if you've got, another solid quarterback, and one of the things I try to do if I know that I'm going to be targeting Deshaun Watson late is getting somebody with a late bye week, just so I don't have, somebody who's getting a week 6 bye week and then I've got no quarterback that week at all. I'll try to target somebody who's got a week 13, week 14 bye, and then add Deshaun Watson to there. But yeah, especially in tournaments where you're swinging for pure upside, he's a guy who can give you top 3, top 5 production for those final weeks of the season when it matters most. So you never feel good about drafting him there, but there's still a lot of uncertainty in that situation. And if he ends up playing, that can kind of be the cheat code that really helps propel a lot of teams. I see you nodding along, Josh. Not sure if you want to add to Deshaun Watson or if you want to move on to the guy that you'd like to talk about in these final rounds.
Yeah, terrible guy. Great late round pick.
I think we're all on the same page there. Yes.
So my guy is Chris Evans. So Chris Evans, what if we hear that he is the clear direct backup to Joe Mixon? If that comes out, I mean, Samaje Perine is like the ultimate just a guy of just a guys. Like, if there was a poster child backup running back for just a guy, probably look a whole lot like Samaje Perine. With Chris Evans, if for some reason it's like, oh yeah, Chris Evans looks kind of like the backup, or he looks kind of like the third down back, because as we've seen, they just don't really want to give Mixon the entire role. Chris Evans is shooting up many, many rounds in ADP. He's going to shoot up, 4, 5, 6 rounds if that kind of news comes out. So he feels like a really low-risk pick. If he doesn't do anything, whatever. Took him in the 18th round. And I think Mixon, what we kind of forget is this guy has kind of struggled to stay healthy. He's a heavy carries running back. Those are the guys that often get injured, is the guys that are pushing 300 carries in a season. And it's like, whoa, I'm sorry. The guy had one perfectly healthy season, which wasn't even perfectly healthy when you think about it. Like, the guy missed time due to injury last year, but whatever. Like, they're like, oh, like, look how many carries he had. Exactly. This is a guy that's frequently struggled to stay healthy and picked up numerous lower body injuries throughout his career. Finally had a big workload. So yeah, he took even more collisions last year. I would be pretty surprised if Mixon plays every game this year. I think anytime he's out with now in year 2, Chris Evans, I think, could have a monster role. We already saw him be a more than competent pass catcher, and the touchdown upside is there because of the offense. So I think he's a pretty excellent final round pick.
Yeah, and like you said, it's just the uncertainty right now, and that's why Chris Evans and Samaje Perine are both going so late. If we get one tweet from Ben Baby saying Chris Evans is the clear-cut backup, he's going to be shooting right up there with Rachaad White and Alexander Mattison going as a high-end handcuff. Before we sign off here, first of all, fantastic show, loaded with great information. I could talk to you guys for hours because it's just, nonstop information coming out that is going to be useful to me, the viewers, anybody listening to this. But before we sign off here, Jared, let everyone know once again where they can find you on social media and what you got going on right now.
Yeah, at Smola DS on Twitter. And then, check out draftsharks.com. We're pumping out all sorts of stuff. And again, those rankings are updated every single day as needed.
Awesome. And same to you, Josh. Let everyone know where they can find you and what you got going on over at 33rd Team.
So you can find me on Twitter at JLarkyTweets, and at the 33rd Team, we're going to have our big site launch, content launch, August 1st. I can now officially say it on stream because we hit the 8 p.m. Eastern mark and the tweets come out. We have just hired real name Chris Farley to be our head of betting. The guy's a pro bettor. He got 5th in the NFL Circuit contest last year. He has experience teaching gambling courses. He has experience on BetUS TV. He has experience writing content for the Odds Breakers. The guy's just an absolute machine. He even has a day job on top of that he'd been doing that whole time. Like, couldn't be more excited to bring him on, be able to pick his brain, and for everyone to kind of learn betting from him. So not much to say on my end, but everyone go out and find Farley Bets on Twitter and give that guy a follow.
Absolutely. We'll check that out. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe at youtube.com/footballguys so you can catch this show and all of the other content that we come having at you every single week. I'm Dave Kluge. You can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much. On the right side of your screen, you'll be able to see all of those YouTube things, some other videos that we've got, and where you can subscribe. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, youtube.com/footballguys. Turn those notifications on so you can see all of our live shows as well as all of our short content and our full-length shows, youtube.com/footballguys. Thank you so much.